You are listening to the Bay Area Theology Podcast. Theology from the Bay, for the Bay. This podcast has been brought to you by Bayseed Collective. Learn more about it at bayseed.org. In this podcast, we host conversations with local ministry and thought leaders on theology, ministry, culture, and life in the Bay Area with Dr. Cameron Schweitzer and Ricky Blaha.
Everyone's a theologian.
That's right.
Everyone.
Dr. Cameron Schweitzer, what is your doctorate in? It's a PhD, right?
That's correct. I want to thank all of our listeners out there who are listening to this first episode, namely our parents and our wives. So thank you to the listener. Yeah, so as you know, but for our listeners, I have a PhD in Christian theology from Gateway Seminary, where I serve as the campus director here in the Bay Area and as an associate professor of historical theology. So yes, PhD in theology from Gateway Seminary. I wrote my dissertation on the American theologian Jonathan Edwards, specifically his biblical typology and divergent interpretations within the scholastic field as to what it was and how it's to be understood. And then I also got my Master of Divinity from Gateway Seminary with a focus in biblical studies and also youth ministry, believe it or not.
Interesting.
That could be a funny sort of tell how that changed. And then my first set of degrees are I have a bachelor's degree in Christian studies and a bachelor's degree in philosophy from California Baptist University, where I transferred after 1 year of study at UC Santa Barbara, where at the time my intention was to become a lawyer.
Oh, interesting.
At what point God called me into ministry, and then we could go down that trail of how I got to where I am. But yeah, so that was my academic background. UC Santa Barbara with an intention to study philosophy, go into law, and then transferred to Cal Baptist, bachelor's in theology and philosophy, MDiv with Gateway Seminary, and then a PhD in theology with Gateway Seminary.
That's great. So when people think of the Bay Area, I don't think that they often think of it being a home for theology or theological thinking.
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious, as you started down that road of school studies, theology, first of all, what led you to wanting to pursue theology as part of your PhD or as your PhD program?
Yeah. So it's like the Proverbs say that in the abundance of counselors, there's wisdom. And so when I speak with young people, which I do a lot in my role, or people seeking wisdom or direction, one of the things I'll tell people is, look, if you hear a lot of people in your life saying the same thing and they're not talking to each other, then that might be a good indication that God's trying to say something to you. And so for me, there was that sort of abundance of counselors and people saying the same sort of thing from about the time I was near the end of my bachelor's degree through seminary, that I had enough people starting to say, hey, we really think you should do a PhD and pursue life in the academy, where I was very hesitant at that because when I was, quote unquote, called to ministry as an 18-year-old freshman at UC Santa Barbara, I'd been a Christian like 8 months. Like most young men who receive that call, you think that that call entails full-time vocational ministry, usually as a pastor, or unless you get a specific like missionary call. And most men that I've talked to over the years who have been called to ministry, that however their story looks, it's like, yeah, I felt the call to full-time vocational ministry. And the joke that I've told over the years is that I'm still waiting for the other end of that line to pick up, because I've never been a full-time paid pastor. I've never actually received a paycheck from a church in all my years since I left UC Santa Barbara to pursue the call that I'm still waiting for the Lord to let me pick up. But so I thought that my call meant full-time pastoral vocational ministry. So when I transferred to California Baptist University in 2010, I went with the anticipation that I was going to be a pastor. And it was over several years of study there where God blessed my efforts. I got plugged into a really healthy church also named Redeemer, where we find ourselves here. But it was Redeemer in Riverside, where at that time it was First Baptist Church of Norco. And I really enjoyed my studies. And as I found myself in the midst of classrooms with like pastors' kids, missionaries' kids, youth group all-stars, and there I was like a fresh Christian reprobate, like long hair. I felt like a fish out of water, and so I didn't take anything for granted. I just threw myself into my studies, and I've always enjoyed school and was fairly good at school. And I would study hours every day because I really believed in the seriousness of that call that I'd been given. So now fast forward through my first few years at Cal Baptist, and I'm now beginning to think, well, what does seminary look like for me? Because most people who go to a Bible college or university like I did, and like you did too, like you get a bachelor's degree in ministry or theology or Bible, whatever, you have to go to seminary usually because most churches are expecting someone to have an MDiv or at least some sort of equivalent. So I'm starting to think about seminary. And again, at the time, Ricky, like I'm in my mind, no, God's called me to full-time pastoral ministry. I'm preparing to that end. And so my concentrations in my Christian studies side, it was in pastoral ministry. And in the philosophy side, it was apologetics. So those are sort of my backgrounds in philosophy and apologetics that I still use to this day. Now, I was thinking California is where the Lord's had me. I couldn't ever imagine living outside of California. So I thought, okay, this is where I'm going to be. And I want to go to seminary in a place that looks like where I'm going to minister because it didn't make sense to me. And this is my pitch to people studying at Gateway in California, is it doesn't make sense to me to leave the context where you're wanting to minister to then go to another context to learn from them how to do ministry. I used to joke when I was in admissions and recruiting that it'd be like saying that, well, I really want to learn Spanish. Like, that's great. Well, what's your plan? Well, I'm going to go to France. I'm going to live in France and try to learn Spanish. Probably not the best place to go. There's Spain or Mexico or Honduras, whatever. So I'm thinking, California is where God wants me to be, and this is where I should prepare to go to seminary. However, it was around my junior, senior year of college when I'm beginning to have those thoughts and conversations that now I'm having my professors at Cal Baptist and some of my classmates saying, hey, we really think you should do a doctorate. We really think, you have the aptitude for it. You have the chops for it in the classroom. We really see that for you. And I thought, no, God's called me to ministry. Maybe I'd get a doctor of ministry one day, but no, I want to be a pastor. That's what God's called me to. And then I was having professors say, no, Kevin, you really need to go like an Ivy League divinity school or, a bigger, more prestigious evangelical institution like Trinity at the time or Beeson at the time or Southern to prepare to then go into the PhD route. And I was just very hesitant to heed that advice.
Yeah.
And so the Lord then made clear to me when I went home for my last spring break as a senior in college that I needed to move back home to my mom in Redlands. She, single, all of our kids moved out. I could tell that she needed me.
Yeah.
God made that very clear. And so I moved back. That was my plan. And then it limited what my seminary options were. And at the time, Golden Gate had a campus in Brea, California, in Orange County, and they offered me a full tuition scholarship, which like rarely happens. And so I said, okay, that's what God wants me to do.
That's great.
So then I went to Golden Gate. I was the youngest student by far.
And Golden Gate is the predecessor or the previous
Gateway Seminary.
Gateway Seminary, yeah.
That's right. So Golden Gate became Gateway in 2016 when it left Mill Valley, Marin County, and moved to the Inland Empire, Ontario in 2016. So I'm in Brea, living in Redlands, commuting down there with friends that I'd made twice a week, sometimes once a week, still thinking I'm, going to go into full-time pastoral ministry. I just finished a church internship at my church, planning to pastoral ministry. That was my thoughts.
Yeah.
And now, though, I'm starting to have my seminary professors and my seminary classmates and people at church saying, Cameron, we really think you need to do a PhD. And so now that's like my second-ish year into seminary. Golden Gate's announced its transition from Mill Valley to Southern California. I, at that time, began to work for Golden Gate in my first job with the seminary, and I've been with the seminary now over 10 years, which I can't believe. I was 23 years old when Adam Groza first hired me as an enrollment specialist. So I did recruiting, admissions, things like that. And it became clear, like, okay, I need to do a PhD. God, you've been telling me this over enough years now through enough different people in my life that it'd be disobedient to not heed that word.
Yeah.
And so then I began to think about, well, what would I want to do my PhD in? And I knew that I wanted to do theology. I always enjoyed theology, philosophy, apologetics, more the realm of like larger ideas and how ideas relate than like the nitty gritty of like exegesis or Greek or Hebrew, which I just didn't want to do. So then I knew, because of the way that PhDs work, that languages weren't my strong suit academically, and I didn't want to really have to know at the expert level Greek, Hebrew, German, French to move through a program like that. So then deduction was, okay, well, you need to do a PhD in some sort of English theological focus. And around that time, through the ministry of John Piper, I was introduced to Jonathan Edwards, who then became one of the most important influences in my life. spiritually, intellectually, theologically. And I knew, okay, well, I want to study Jonathan Edwards because that would mean everything he's written is in English. All of the scholarly resources are in English, so then I don't have to worry about German, French, Latin, Italian, any Ugaritic, anything like
You
that.
sound like the rest of us now. Like we're I love studying the Bible. I love studying theology. Don't know that I want to get into any other languages.
Yeah. So I did Greek and Hebrew and have probably forgotten all that I've studied. So I'm sorry to Joe Sloonacre and Richard Mobley for having forgotten all that they taught me. So I'm then having that, okay, what does that look like? And then this was now the end of my seminary career, like 2016, 2017. Knew I wanted to go into Edwards, and at Gateway, we have an Edwards scholar by the name of Chris Chun. So I sat down with Dr. Chun and said, hey, this is what I'm really interested in doing. He said, that's great. I'd strongly encourage you to consider staying at Gateway and studying with me. And Chris, being Chris, was very tight-lipped. He's like, because there's going to be some things on the horizon as to why Gateway would be the place to study Edwards over the next few years. And that was because like the next year or two, we announced that we were then the West Coast Center for Jonathan Edwards Studies.
Oh, wow.
In partnership with Yale. So that meant we had conferences on the horizon. We had additional resources, visiting scholars, things like that. So he said, I'd really like you to stay here and study with me. And so I looked at other programs and I decided, you know what? I work at Gateway. I'm in California. This is where the Lord wants me. This makes sense. So then I'm looking at Edwards. He then pushed me towards what my dissertation topic was. And then the rest, as they would say, is history. And that's how I then got into the program, was studying Edwards, and then had the specific dissertation focus I did was because of Chris Chun's very wise mentorship.
That's awesome.
At that time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you grew up in California, primarily most of your life in Southern California.
Correct.
And then you end up here in the Bay Area because of your placement as the director of the Bay Area campus. What was that transition like? Like what are some of the noticeable differences that you discovered coming from a Southern California context to now living in the Bay Area?
Yeah. I was asked that a lot my first year here. People would ask me like, how's the Bay Area? Thinking like, is this hellish, homeless landscape? And it's definitely not that. I've told people there's a reason folks pay so much money to live here. It's a very beautiful place. And in comparison to where I grew up, now I tell people I didn't grow up in the places in Southern California that people vacation or think of. Like I didn't grow up in Orange County, San Diego, LA, Malibu. I grew up in Redlands, Yucaipa. Like I grew up on the, no shade to my own towns, but I grew up really far east on Interstate 10, like on the edge of the desert and the foothills to the Big Bear Lake Arrowhead Mountains. Redlands is a town of, 80,000 people. Yucaipa's maybe 60,000 now.
When I first moved to the Bay Area, to California, the Bay Area is the only place that I've lived. I was told that there was nothing really good to go see in Southern California, with the exception of San Diego. So you probably have a different opinion. I would imagine growing up in that area, there are things that and places that you've been that the common ordinary person might not even know about.
Well, I tell people, and I have been saying it for a few years, the whole debate between NorCal, SoCal isn't a debate. Like if you're comparing where I grew up to here, it's not a debate. Like this wins every time.
Oh, there you go.
Now, if you're talking about coastal Orange County, San Diego,
pretty amazing.
It's like Mission Valley, San Diego, downtown San Diego, Coronado Island. Those are near perfection.
That's awesome.
Just like the Bay Area. So to me, the Bay Area and that are like some of the best places in California to live. So then when I moved up here, there's a different culture that's very noticeable to me within a few weeks of living here. So one of the, to use a fancy word, is synecdoche, like where a part represents a whole, to me was driving. So in the Bay Area, people tend to drive the speed limit or 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. It's rare that you see people going 15, 20, 25 miles over the speed limit.
Yeah, right.
That's the norm in Southern California. If there's no traffic, people are flying. Fast lanes, 80, 85. People don't let you merge. They're very aggressive. Like we're here in the Bay Area, 9 times out of 10, if I'm looking to merge, people slow down to let me in. So there is that noticeable difference in driving and what that represents socially, personally. So that was one noticeable difference. The other thing I would say is that the Bay Area is much more compact versus where I grew up in the Inland Empire. Everything's so spread out. Like you have a lot more just empty open spaces, which are slowly being filled with tract homes and strip malls.
Yeah, that's right. You were telling me about that because I was down there last year and I was driving that stretch from Riverside down to like LA.
Yeah,
And you were just telling me how it's just like this sprawling spread
it's true.
of just city. Like it's just
Unbroken
like,
city.
yeah, unbroken city, which I didn't really pay attention to it much until you told me that. And then I was like, you're exactly right. Because you can't drive very far. I mean, if you planned it out right, you could drive in the Bay Area long enough to where you don't really leave well, not sprawling city, not with tall buildings.
Yeah.
But you could leave suburban area, or you could be in suburban areas or urban areas for a little while, but nothing like Southern
No,
California.
you get on Interstate 10 from my hometown, let's say Yucaipa. You drive from Yucaipa to Santa Monica where it starts or ends, however you view it. It's one unbroken city.
Yeah.
That's how one of my friends in seminary described it, who's from the Midwest. It's one unbroken city. So when I grew up in that, which is, tract homes, strip malls, the color palette for most of the year is brown, big, tall, jaggedy mountains. To move to the Bay Area, like where it's raining a lot, things are green, the air is clean. I was used to growing up with smog. And so, like, as a kid, growing up in the Inland Empire, we'd go to our local water park and you'd come home, you'd be coughing, your chest would hurt because it's just smog. Like here, I'd tell people the air is cleaner, the water's cleaner.
Yeah.
It's just there's actually seasons here. Where I grew up, there was essentially 2.5 seasons, hot, less hot, and some rain, and fire season. So, but here I love the fall, I love the spring. It's a very noticeably different place to live. And then the other thing that is a significant difference as well, and you know this, and we've talked about this, is the different kind of ethnic diversity that's represented here versus where I grew up. Granted, it's changing, but like where I grew up, it was white, Hispanic, and then a sprinkling of African American. Like that was Yucaipa and Redlands. Now that's starting to change with more Asian immigrants and Middle Eastern immigrants and Indian immigrants, but that wasn't the case when I was growing up. So here, like where I live in Fremont, I mean, I'm one of, in my little townhome strip, one of 2 white guys. And the other guy's married just like I am to someone who's not white. Everyone is either Indian or Asian or Middle Eastern.
Yeah.
So like that's different. And those cultures have a different, feel to them, different food to them, different values to them. And so that's all evident in the Bay Area. And then the other thing I'd say lastly is also different from where I grew up is here, most people are highly educated and are working in white collar jobs. When I meet new people and I ask, I'm like, oh, what do you do for work? Again, 9 times out of 10, it's, well, I'm an engineer, software, hard, whatever. I work at one of the big 7 mag companies, or I work at a startup or biotech. It's rare that I meet someone and say, oh, I'm a teacher.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, I'm a policeman. Where I grew up, that's usually what you'd interact with is like blue collar folks or people who work like your normal middle class jobs.
Yeah.
So that's a significant difference here.
So with those last 2 points, the last 2 observations of the diversity of people in the Bay Area, and then they kind of like the educated or the affluent people that might be here that you might not get in the same kind of concentration in Southern California. What kind of impact does that have on understanding the world that we live in through a theological lens or through a biblical lens? So, this is the Bay Area Theology Podcast.
Yeah.
So we're kind of looking at both theology, and theology is objective for the most part. Like there are gray points, areas that people don't quite agree on. But when you're looking for truth, we can look at doctrine and theology. But then when we're looking at the Bay Area, there's kind of there's even more of a gray, or kind of like a different, a multidimensional aspect to the people that live here, whether it's culture, the language, where they come from, and then also the fluency as well. So what do you think? How does that speak to what the diversity of the Bay Area says to understanding truth or theology through that lens?
So theology in its most proper sense is just the knowledge of God or the study of God. And so that's when you talk about theology proper, is the study of the person and ways of the creator of God. That's what theology is. It's going back to the, even the classical Greek philosophers talked about the theology of the God knowledge, God study. So in its most proper sense, theology is simply the study of who God is and what God has done, or how he's revealed himself or how he's not revealed himself. So that's theology in its most proper sense. And then sometimes we're talking about Christian theology, that would say, well, what does the Christian scriptures, the Old and the New Testament, what do those say about who God is, about what he has done? So that's Christian theology, is a focus specifically on the Christian scriptures and what they say as divine revelation about who God is and what he has done. And then in a broader sense, Christians will sometimes speak about theology. And by that, looking at some of the books on your shelves, like they think of like John Frame's systematic theology. So then they'll think about not just like who God is and what God has done, but they think about doctrines regarding humanity or sin or the work of Christ or the church or the end times. So that then theology becomes a catch, sort of a catchphrase for like just the deeper things of like the scriptures.
Yeah.
So that is usually how people think about theology, is you're more technically speaking about who God is, what he has done,
Yeah.
studying that either through like nature or through specific holy books would be the two
Yeah.
means of theology. And there's also analytic theology, so think about like logic and ideas and approaching revelation that way. And then there's the ways that people think about the Bible broadly, and then studying the Bible in like a deeper way than, let's just say, I'm going to, like in a sermon or in a Bible study, we're going to go like verse by verse through the book of John or through First Peter or through Isaiah, like, we're doing here at church, and asking like, well, what do these texts teach us specifically? So then theology is trying to step back from just like exegetical reflections, or that's interpreting individual verses, and say like, how do we start building bridges across the Bible on certain topics, or what are called theological loci?
Yeah.
So that's what theology is. So then we want to think about like, okay, how does that shape the way we then think about interacting with folks in the Bay Area?
Yeah.
And it's very different
Right.
from Southern California. And I've noticed that, and it's, as you know though, dude, like it's, the Bay Area is, people talk about microclimates. There's also microcultures. And so if you think about our context in Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley adjacent, where we live in Fremont, the kind of people you'll meet and the kind of conversations you'll have is very different than if you go to Oakland, or if you go to San Francisco, or if you cross that Golden Gate Bridge and go to Marin.
Right.
Like very different. So I think that when people think stereotypically about the Bay, they're thinking about San Francisco. They're thinking about the yuppie white liberals in Marin, or maybe they're thinking about some of the rougher parts of the Bay like Oakland, but they're not necessarily thinking of San Jose, which is like highly immigrant focused from Asia and South Asia and the Middle East.
Right.
And so if you're talking about our context in Silicon Valley adjacent, it's going to be different from the experience I had growing up when, you would talk to people who, if they weren't Catholic, or they hadn't grown up going to Protestant church and had some sort of like Christian religious framework, they'd probably be atheist or agnostic, if not Mormon. Because where I grew up, there's a lot of Mormons.
Right. Yeah.
So that was generally like Catholic, post-Protestant, lukewarm, or like my former best friend in high school, who now described himself, I don't know how he would now, but at the time he described himself as a antagonistic atheist, so sort of an apologetic atheist. Not saying he's an apologizer for being an atheist, but he's like making a case argumentatively for the legitimacy of atheism. So that's different from my neighbors. The couple who lives on one side, they're Indian, first-generation immigrants from India as adults, and the wife, sweet lady, she's Hindu, and the husband is I think he's said to me that he's agnostic or atheistic, but he grew up Sikh. So like they're a Sikh and Hindu family, and his dad, when I met him, is a practicing Sikh. And then my neighbors on the other side of the wall, they are second-generation immigrants from Pakistan, and just based on conversations and just noticing what they wear and don't wear and how they talk and live, I mean, they would be culturally Muslim.
Yeah.
So very different from how I grew up. And so some of the conversations I've had with them or some of my other neighbors, where, to quote the Apostle Paul in Acts 17, I can tell that you're very religious. That's a different conversation theologically about who God is and how he's revealed himself, to someone like, I interacted with in college. I think of some of the people on my floor as a freshman at Santa Barbara when I was a new believer on fire for Christ, and the kind of evangelistic theological conversation I would have with them, where you have to start from there is no God
Yeah.
to what you have up here, which is like, well, no, I believe in God or gods, which is a very different theological starting place.
Yeah.
So that has a significant influence as we think about who we're having theological conversations with. Where do they live in the Bay Area? What's their racial, identity?
Yep. Yeah.
That's going to significantly impact what their ideological framework is for having a theological conversation.
Yeah. I think that this conversation is going to be unique to the Bay Area, at least in my experience, having been here for almost 12 years now myself. I see a lot of people talking about ministry in the Bay Area. I've been to conferences, been to places where people have just presented different techniques or methods for doing ministry in the Bay Area. But I don't know that I've seen anybody yet do what we're trying to do, and that is approach things starting from a theological foundation.
Yeah.
And I think that in some sense, all the descriptions of theology that you just gave, I think for the average person might feel a little scary or intimidating.
Yeah.
When you start talking about theology proper, even biblical theology or systematic theology. But I think that it's important for the sake of this conversation and for the sake of this podcast, just to emphasize that we have to start in those foundational areas of who God is. Because even as you were just saying, so many of the different people from around the world that live here in the Bay Area, they have an idea of God, or
Yeah.
they have a concept of a deity
Yeah.
or deities even. And so I think that for us, like, it's great to figure out what works. And I think that, there is the discipline of theology that would we would feel, most people would feel more accustomed to, which is applied theology.
Yeah.
Taking, what is all this truth about God and who we are in the world that we live in? What does it mean for us and how we live it out in our particular places? But I do think that it is important for us to understand that if we're really going to make an impact, and if we're going to reach the people in the Bay Area around us, that we've got to have a solid foundation of who God is.
Of course.
A solid foundation of what the Bible teaches about the world that we live in, and trying to understand the experiences of our lives through a theological lens.
Yeah.
And so I hope, like, as I'm listening to you speak, I think that as I anticipate that our wives and family might be listening to this podcast, and hopefully a few more, I think that I hope that it encourages people to think more deeply about life in the Bay Area, ministry in the Bay Area. Yeah.
What I say to folks who are out there and like you said, Ricky, that just like theology sounds so intimidating. I just want me and the Bible and the Spirit. Like, that's enough for me. The simple reality, folks, is that everyone's a theologian.
That's right.
Everyone. And so it's not a matter of whether or not you're a theologian and whether or not you think theologically. You do. And it's a question then of how good of a theologian are you, and how well do you think theologically. And so we need to put that thinking aside and say, oh, that's just for the academics, or that's just for the pastor. It's like, no. When you try to articulate to your unbelieving neighbor the Trinity, or how Jesus of Nazareth was both truly God and truly man, right? Nicene Creed.
Right.
That's theology. When you try to then, if you're like us and you're a Baptist and you're talking to a friend who's Presbyterian and you're articulating to them like, well, why you go to a Baptist church versus a Presbyterian church? Well, that's you thinking and speaking theologically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just would hope that would maybe dissuade you from that incorrect thought of, well, theology is only for the highly educated or for those who are called to ministry, because it's not.
Right.
And how you think about God, how you think about the Bible, how you think about yourself. So doctrine of God, doctrine of Scripture and revelation, and doctrine of man or anthropology, that's going to affect everything.
Right.
Because what you believe shapes what you think, it shapes what you say, it shapes what you feel, it shapes what you do. And so rather than being unreflective We want to be reflective and be reflective about the scriptures with the scriptures.
Yeah.
And so that's one of my hopes with this, is that we can get more people in the Bay Area thinking deeply about the things they say they believe.
Right. I think it's important. I kind of want to like even dig into this just a little bit more, because I think what you said is very important, and that is everyone's a theologian, and that's not by choice necessarily.
No.
Everyone is a theologian because we have an understanding of what we believe
Yeah.
about the world that we live in. We have an understanding of what we believe about God. Even if we don't believe in God, that's still a belief
Yeah.
that says that of what I think about the world that I live in my life.
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that, for the people that are listening to this podcast and you're anticipating future conversations, I don't know that people who will be listening to this podcast already have, compartments for understanding what they believe and how they believe it and all the nuances of what they believe. But I think that if we sat down with almost any person and started talking about faith and life and what's important to them, you're going to start finding that there are compartments for the way that anybody and everybody thinks about
Of course.
things. So I think that this podcast, this show, is intended to help people start thinking more deeply, start thinking more theologically about the life that they live in. And it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone listening has to come to the same conclusion that we come to as well. And I think it's a big part of what we want to do with the podcast is like, for anybody who's listening to this so far, you might be thinking, is it just going to be you two talking the whole time from here on out? And that's not the case. We're actually beginning this conversation because this is something that we believe that God placed on our hearts, in our laps, to be able to lead this conversation. It's a conversation that's been desperately needed in the Bay Area, and it's an opportunity for us to be able to lead the way. But there are so many other people in the Bay Area that are thinking this way, and their minds, their hearts, their experiences are rooted in the foundation that is theological.
Yeah.
And so our hope is that with this podcast that we'd be able to invite people into this room to be able to have conversations about what they are studying, what they are seeing, what they're experiencing, and being able to together come up with some sort of almost a virtual think tank to be able to share these ideas, not just from us, but from people from all over the Bay and from a diversity of theological backgrounds as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that people in the, months and years to come, as they engage this material, will be able to see the diversity of thought and deep thought that's represented by folks across the Bay Area. That's my intention.
Yeah.
And as I've now been 3 years in this role, starting my 4th year soon, I have been pleasantly surprised with how many doctoral level trained ministers and other thought leaders there are in the Bay Area who have PhDs or doctorate of ministries or PhDs in philosophy or theology or Old Testament or New Testament or counseling. Like I just got connected with a guy who's got his doctorate in Christian counseling, who are serving in churches around the Bay Area. And I want to be able to have conversations with those people to then expose their thought, their theology to folks around the Bay Area and even outside the Bay Area. They might listen to these conversations we're having.
Yeah, that's great.
That's the intention, as we've said, is to be able to expose theology from the Bay Area for the Bay Area. That's our desire.
That's right.
Is so that, like we were joking about before we turned the cameras on, as part of the scriptural foundation for this is Nathanael's question, can anything good come from Nazareth? And then, they said the response is, well, come and see.
Right.
Talking about Jesus.
Right.
And so in the same way, I feel like people, even in the Bay Area, have what's sometimes in the academic circles called imposter syndrome. Like you don't really feel in like academic circles like I have this, like you don't feel like a real professor, a real academician. So I feel like sometimes people in the Bay Area have kind of an imposter syndrome as it relates to Christianity. They think, well, like nothing good comes from here.
Yeah.
Like there's no good theological stuff or ministerial stuff. It's too pagan.
Yeah.
It's too lost. It's too sinful. It's too this. Nothing good can come from here. So there's like the internal question of, can anything good come from the Bay Area? And then outside, no one thinks, oh, dude, there's going to be good theological stuff coming from the Bay Area. Nothing good comes from that hellhole.
Right. I was going to say, but I found that when people do come here who would be noted as significant theologians, when they come here from outside of California, and even outside of just the Bay Area proper, there is a disconnect between what people understand theologically, ministry-wise, especially people coming from the East Coast or the South. They come here and they've got great ideas, and where they live and where they serve, the things that they're talking about really work well.
Yeah.
Like it's proven ministry ideas that they bring here, but it's not proven in the Bay Area.
No.
And so it is interesting. Like most people might look into the Bay Area and say, what good can come from the Bay Area?
Yeah.
But as Alan Cross, who we're going to have on the podcast at some point, Alan Cross has said to me many times, nobody's coming for us. We've got to do this ourselves.
That's right.
We've got to figure out the answers to ministry in the Bay Area ourselves.
That's right.
And so I think that's what, hopefully this is the beginning of that united conversation around theology in the Bay Area. Because I think another aspect, and there are a few people that come to my mind immediately that I hope we have here to be able to talk on this. One of the other aspects of theology and ministry that you find in the Bay Area is that so much ministry and thinking around the United States is a Western linear sort of thinking.
Oh, yeah.
And with the influx of the immigrants that come from all over, especially Asia, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, there is an Eastern mindset that is very, very different than anything that you're used to if you've grown up almost in any other place in the country.
I mean, you and I both know all you got to do is go to Central Park and go to Lake Elizabeth or Always Dreamin' or that big rock park Malachi likes. He calls it the big park, my son. And you just look around and you think, dude, where am I? You and I would be like one of two other white guys in that entire park. And you're going to see people that like you've never seen that sort of skin tone of the hair and eyes before. Like you're going to hear languages spoken you've never heard. So like there is a very different religious ideological context in which we find ourselves. But the hope is that, again, outside and inside, people can be able to answer in the affirmative. Does anything good theologically come from Nazareth, the Bay Area? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
And I want to, as best I can, try to be, you and I, like the cultivators of that conversation, of that content, because maybe you found this podcast on our website, bayareatheology.com, bayareatheology.org. And like, so then you've also seen that on the website, where we have a publishing aspect where people can write white papers, essays, to think out loud with others about, theological or applied theological issues. Or maybe you're listening to us through KFAX or through one of the podcast publication websites. And you think, I didn't know that. Yeah, so come to our website, bayareatheology.com, bayareatheology.org, and you'll be able to see folks. And my goal is, as I invite people onto the podcast, I'm also going to invite them to write something so that then we can start to have both oral and visual, written and podcast content that's on theology and applied theology, again, from the Bay for the Bay, so that this can be a landing space where people who are interested in theology can come and see who the thought leaders and ministry leaders are around the Bay, to be able then to go learn from them, and then to hear these conversations, to see these conversations in the papers and in the comments, to then contribute to that and reflect on that and learn from that.
Yeah.
That's my goal, is to cultivate sort of a theological garden.
That's great.
That's unique to the Bay Area, that will then flourish in the Bay Area. Like you said, you can't take an Eastern or a Southeastern United States theology or ministry mindset and come plant that in the Bay and think that it's going to work.
Right.
Just like you can't take, a desert flower and plant it in Marin and think that it's going to flourish.
That's right.
It won't. Like you have to plant the foliage in the place and the context in which that foliage is meant to grow.
Right. In that image has been something that I believe God has put on my mind a lot recently, is that the Bay Area is kind of like this garden, and I like to even describe it as a garden of wildflowers. If you're wanting to grow a rose garden, you pick away and weed out all the other plants around it, and you kind of want to do whatever's helpful for the gardens, for the roses to flourish in that garden. But I feel like the Bay Area, one of the most healthy ecosystems and environments is one where you have a diversity of plants and organisms that are growing together. You've got that symbiotic relationship where one organism is feeding another organism. The nutrients and minerals that one plant has it's receiving it from the other, and vice versa. They're helping each other to grow, and it's producing a healthy, vibrant environment. I think the Bay Area is very much that way.
Yeah.
Is that like even as we're talking about bringing people into this conversation who are here, who have different experiences, different avenues of study, and they come here and have this conversation. We are organisms that are coming together to try to create this symbiotic relationship so that there is a healthy, flourishing, fruitful
Yeah.
ministry here in the Bay Area. I think that one of the mistakes that people have when they come to the Bay Area, and you see this in a lot of other places, even Southern California is this way, but I spent the majority of my life in the Southeast, in South Carolina, and you have a church on every corner, and I think one of the marks of having a church that is successful and thriving is that if it's a one-stop shop.
Yeah.
It's a place where they have a ministry for everybody and everything.
Oh, yeah.
And you can go there and nobody, like whatever preferences you have as a family or as an individual, like they're being met by that one church.
It's like when I was in Birmingham the other week and I drove by, I'm like, is that a college? Nope, that's a church. Is that? Nope, that's a church. Is that a nope, that's a church. It's like these, and it's like every few miles blew my mind, and that's not the case here. So yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just saying. Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have to understand is the Bay Area. We're going to have a few churches that are going to be those one-stop shops. You're going to be able to go to them. They have a ministry for everybody. But quite honestly, they're not. Even if I had some of those pastors in this room who are leading those larger organizations, I've had them tell me specifically, we can't connect with everybody. We can't serve everyone. We can't minister to every particular person and all their needs.
Yeah.
And so I think that being able to admit the fact that we are a wild flower garden bed with organisms that don't produce everything on our own, but we are together having cultivating this symbiotic relationship between people, between ministries. I think it's just a beautiful place to watch the Spirit of God work in the way that it's going to work. So I think that a big part of what we want to do is we want to bring those voices together, find the ways that God is working in individual people's lives and in their hearts, in their minds, in their experiences, and bring them together and let's together in one big, long, extended conversation figure out what is it that God's doing here? What can we learn? How can we implement these things into a more applied theology in our lives and in our ministries? And I think that through those kind of conversations, we're going to see a continued growing fruitfulness that's going to come out of that.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I'm in this conversation is because I did move out here. I'm not a native Californian. I moved out here in 2014 to help plant a church. There was a church that was dying and had gone through some difficult times, and it was needing a new vision. It was needing some new leadership. And Bob Bixby was a friend of mine, and we had been a friend for a long time. He was pastoring outside of Chicago. I was transitioning out of a ministry that I was in Baltimore, and he had a connection here with this church. He had been connected with this particular church for about 6 years, and they were in need of new leadership. And so Bob had committed to coming out here and helping replant this church. I was looking for a place to land. Bob invited me to consider coming out here. One thing led to the next. We did a lot of praying, did a lot of searching, because I'd never been past the Rockies. I'd spent my whole life in the Midwest or in the South. I'd been all over the East Coast, but I'd never been to the West Coast. And I didn't have anything against the West Coast or California, as so many other people that I lived near did. I didn't have anything against it. It just was not of much interest to me to come out here. But it's interesting. The thing that sold me on coming out here was we came to visit Fremont. We just came out here for a weekend just to look at what was here, pray about it,
Yeah.
figure out what God would have us to do. We went to Lake Elizabeth, the that park down in the middle of the city, and we just looked around and saw so many different people from so many different places in the world, and we just thought, man, what a wonderful place to be able to do ministry.
Oh, yeah.
And so it really was the people and the culture that we experienced in that one weekend that I think was the catalyst for causing us to realize this was what God was doing and this was where God was leading us. So we moved out here in 2014, and we started replanting this church, but it wasn't easy. It was challenging. I was actually not even intentionally trying to think about this podcast when I was doing this, but earlier today I was going through some files in my Dropbox account, and I found this audio clip, about an hour and a half long audio of a vision casting service that we hosted when we first came out here.
Really?
And we had different people present like the story of the church that we were replanting, the almost like a social and cultural and economic analysis of the Bay Area. And that was done by one of our elders at the time, Ashish, who was an engineer here in the Bay Area from India. And then Bob gave a ministry vision, a missional vision of doing church work here. I took that audio file, that hour and a half long audio file, and I dropped it into ChatGPT to say, analyze this and give me like detailed notes of everything that was presented in that conversation. And it spit out 2 pages worth of detailed notes. And I read through that and I thought, oh my goodness, 12 years ago, this is what we were presenting. This is what we were talking about. We were talking about healthy churches, theologically rooted churches. We were talking about a missionary mindset, and we were talking about being a ministry that would plant and revitalize other churches. And all of it was just rich, deep content that what we were presenting 12 years ago.
Mm.
And in spite of the fact that over the last 12 years, we've had failures and we've had places that we haven't fully succeeded in what we hoped we would do, we have learned a lot from our experience. And I can look at that original proposal of a vision for what ministry would look like coming in as a missionary to the Bay Area, and I could say, man, we're still on track pursuing that vision, pursuing that mission, pursuing that sort of a ministry here in the Bay Area. And it's not as clean and polished as we would have hoped the last 12 years would have been.
Yeah.
And I could certainly say we've had some great ups and some severe downs over the last 12 years. But I just think it's really exciting to be able to know that this conversation and the heart of this podcast really stems from even that initial vision that we had for being here in the Bay Area. So we planted Redeemer Church, which is where my office is here, where we're recording. We planted Redeemer Church. This wasn't the location. We were on the other side of Fremont at the time. But we planted this church, and then we started the Bay Seed Collective,
Yeah.
which is an organization, a 501c3, that we started to plant and revitalize and resource church planting in the Bay Area. And we tried it in different ways. We brought on a lot of different personnel to be able to attempt ministry in planting and replanting around the Bay Area. Some of that went really well. We learned a lot through a lot of our efforts, and but in some ways we also experienced disappointments and frustration and failure. But now we're in a situation where we realize that instead of trying to staff an organization like the Bay Seed Collective with heavy personnel, we believe that through the partnerships that we have gained over the years, we believe that God is going to help us carry on the vision and the ministry of church planting and revitalization, and the work that we were originally called to do out here. We're going to do it through the partnerships, like our partnerships with Gateway Seminary, and with other ministries around the Bay Area. So this really speaks to the heart of who we are and what we want to be. We want to
Yeah.
be a place where we are having deep conversations, and not just deep. We want it to. I mean, whenever you're planting a garden, you want to have the right soil,
Yeah.
right? It's one of my favorite films. It's not a Christian film. It's The Biggest Little Farm. And it's about this farm, this couple that had this dream of having this like incredibly organic and beautiful farm in Southern California. And they start this farm in the middle of this desert area. They grow this farm and it just takes a lot of work. But and it's really cool. I could go on and give a whole review on it. It's one of my favorite films. But when you look at the film and you watch the film with a vision of it being a metaphor for doing ministry.
Yeah.
One of the things that they say in the film that is, it just stuck out to me, and it stuck out to me every time, is that the health of the entire farm lies in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying if we don't have the right soil, then nothing else will thrive.
Yeah.
And I think that theology, the conversation around theology, is a cultivation of the soil that we live in. And so I think that's where I look at this and I say, man, we want to have a healthy, if you will, farm. We want to have a healthy garden in which ministry can thrive in the Bay Area. But it's got to start with the soil. It's got to start with that theology, the proper view of God, a proper view of who we are, a proper view of the world that we live in.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important, though, for the listeners to know that in perpetuity, as this stands as like the head of all of our podcasts of why we're doing what we're doing, sort of thumbnails at the top, that this is a ministry of Bay Seed Collective, and how you all moved from, as you sold a property and used those funds to fund church planting. And now 12 years later, 13 years later,
almost 12 years. Yeah.
Multiple, I mean, you could just say failed or however you want to look at it. Church plants that didn't work out in different locations in Fremont and in San Jose, multiple properties that were, closed on and moved on from, to now here we are as Redeemer Church of Silicon Valley in Union City, which that's very different from where you guys started 12 years ago of heavy personnel, using cash to try to plant these churches. And now it's this different funding model with partnerships and not being so cash flow dependent, right?
Yeah.
To fund so many people actually doing ministry. Now we're trying to equip others, sort of Ephesians 4, like for the work of ministry. And that this podcast, this publishing site is a arm of Bay Seed Collective. And like you said, it's something only God can do of 12, 13, 14 years ago, and that vision casting, that this is an embodiment of what Bob and you were hoping Bay Seed would become, even before Bob Bixby left the Bay last year. Hearing him talk about what he hoped this new endowment model would look like for Bay Seed, this think tank, this creating of resources theologically in the Bay for the Bay, this just has grown up in that soil.
Yeah.
So it's like we were saying before we got on, as Jesus says, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it, can't bring forth new life and sprout and grow fruit. So in the same way, we're thankful that as we're starting the Bay Area Theology Podcast, the Bay Area Theology Publishing site, that this is growing forth from the death, so to speak, of a former organization to become a new organization.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was coincidental that, as I don't know if they could hear it, but the rain was pouring down as you were talking about what was. And often in literature and in movies, rain represents purification and the turning of a new page and starting a new life. So that God is sending forth rain to give new life to a new chapter.
I love that.
I thought, wow, Lord, that's really fitting.
Yeah.
Like I saw on your bookshelf, you have How to Read a Book, and there's a chapter about reading certain metaphors. And I remember that rain always represents purifying and the starting of new life or the turning of a new chapter.
Yeah.
So it's very surreal to think that what you and Bob did over a decade and a half ago almost is now coming to fruition with me and you and those that we'll bring on who were never a part of what Mission Peak Baptist Church was a part of.
Yeah.
But here we are.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't see it much, and maybe it existed, but I don't think it did, because I've talked with a number of people, even recently, about the cooperation and the partnership that's happening right now in the Bay Area. I don't think it existed 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I think that there were people doing things, and I don't necessarily mean this in a harsh way, doing it for their own good. Like, I think people were like, what can I get out of this partnership? And so they were involved in that. But I actually think I was just talking with a few other people who are doing church planting and leading church planting networks around the Bay Area. Now they're saying, let's just get together and do breakfast and talk.
Yeah.
Let's just and that was not happening. I felt like, and part of it was that we were new. We were coming in from the outside when we came here, but we weren't having those conversations. We weren't seeing those conversations happening. And now I think they're happening all over the place. I think I've told a number of people this, and I'll say it here, is that a lot of the churches that I've been involved with, and I can say that I've been a part of at least 3 different churches, because we had a 3-church merge in the last couple of years. All 3 of the churches that I've been a part of started in the middle of the 1950s. And a lot of the other churches in this area, particularly East Bay, started in the 1950s, because there was this migration of ministry and people coming from the South out here into the Bay Area. And so these churches started being planted and thriving and growing. There was definitely a heyday when the Bay Area was thriving with big churches.
70s, 80s, and 90s, man. I've heard that story time and time again around.
That's exactly right. And I think, so when we look back at the 50s, when all of that began, I'm thinking, man, what was going on? I would have liked to have seen all that was going on around here when when all those new ministries were being started and things were taking place. I have a feeling that when people look back 50 years from now to what's happening in the 2020s, that people are going to look back and say something happened.
I hope so.
There was a spark, there was fuel that was put on a fire, and something happened in the Bay Area in the 2020s, and churches were started, churches were revitalized, ministries thrived, people's lives were changed, and the kingdom of God started to flourish in the Bay Area unlike anywhere else. I see signs of it. I see it happening. And so I'm just excited that this podcast gets to be a little bit of a part of what God is doing here. And hopefully it's a place where people who are also experiencing the same things can come on here and share their ideas, share what God's doing in their life, share the experiences that they've had as well.
Well, I mean, that's part of my hope, man. It's like when I sometimes sit around the gatherings I'm a part of around the Bay, and you have like an older cadre of pastors, it can be very defeatist of like, well, I have this sickness and that sickness, or this hurts and that hurts, and church just isn't like it used to be, culture just isn't like it used to be. It can be really discouraging.
Yeah.
But then when you hang out with younger pastors who are in the Bay, they're excited.
Mm-hmm.
Like, dude, God's doing a great thing here. Hearing one time that there, some people think there's a youth movement happening right now in San Francisco, and I want this to be a positive, uplifting thing. And what we're doing with the Bay Area Theology Podcast and publishing site, that this should be a means of encouraging greater zeal for the Lord, greater excitement for what God is doing, so that we can answer in the affirmative. Is anything good come from Nazareth? Yes.
Yeah.
Come and see.
Yeah.
Look what the Lord is doing. And like we were saying, the other sort of biblical leg we're standing on is the very famous psalm where it talks about, setting down their musical instruments by the sides of the rivers of Babylon. And our enemies are asking us to sing the songs of the Lord. And how can we sing the songs of the Lord in a faraway place when we're so far from the quote unquote homeland? And when I've traveled throughout the U.S. over the last 10 years working for Gateway, I can't tell you how many times I've met those, well-intentioned people like you saying, there's Christians in California, like there's Baptists in California, there's a Southern Baptist Seminary in California. I thought it was a land of fruit and nuts, or
that's
whatever.
Exactly what. That's
I've had that conversation more times than I can
Yes.
count. And so sometimes people think of the Bay Area, and rightly so for different reasons, is like it's the shores of Babylon. Here we are up against the Pacific coast. We have the Bay Area. It's the shores of Babylon. It's the plains of Shinar. It's the Tower of Babel. And here we are trying to do the Lord's work.
Yeah.
And what I want to be able to say to folks is, no, that this can be the Lord's place. Like, it's not the Holy Land is not Israel. The Holy Land is not the Southeast where there's a church on every corner. Yeah. The church of God is the Holy Land. Christ is the Holy Land. And so God can birth a new holy place in what seems like an unholy place like the Bay Area. So yes, this can be the place where we sing the songs of the Lord. We do the thought work and the heart work that comes with starting a new garden, planting a new church, writing a new book, starting a new podcast, because God can do a new thing.
Yeah.
He's the God of the new thing.
That's
And so
right.
I just want people in the Bay Area to know as they listen or as they read on our website that like good things are happening here. Good thought is being had here. Good conversations are taking place, and that it's a means of encouragement, and it's a reason to be encouraged. It's something you want to be a part of. Like, it's exciting.
Yeah. If theology hasn't been your thing, but you're interested in this conversation, I just want to encourage you, take a little bit of time. Hopefully you're listening to this on your drive home somewhere. There's a lot of long commutes here, so hopefully we'll be a partner in many people's commutes to and from the Bay Area proper. Yeah. But just take a minute to listen to what's being talked about here on this podcast. And think about it deeply, and how think about how these truths, these ideas might affect your life, and may influence the way that you live, the way that you talk, and the way that you minister wherever it is that God has placed you. So if you want to know more about what we are doing, hopefully you've listened to this all the way through. As Cameron said, you can find us at bayareatheology.org. We are going to have more of these conversations there. We'll have video, audio, written works being published there, articles, white papers.
Yeah.
We just want it to be a landing site for anybody who's thinking deeply about the Bay Area. It's theology from the Bay Area for the Bay Area.
That's right.
And we believe that God's going to do a work through this. So follow us. If you want to be involved in the conversation, reach out to us. There's a lot more to discuss, and there's a lot more to talk about. And so we want to invite you to be a part of that conversation.
Yes, the best is yet to come. And so we hope that you'll enjoy the cultivated conversations we're hoping to have on the shores of Babylon.
Yes.
Well, thank you guys. See ya.
Thanks for listening to the Bay Area Theology Podcast. If this conversation encouraged you, be sure to subscribe, follow, leave a review, and share this episode with someone else who would benefit from it. You can find more episodes, resources, and information at bayareatheology.org. That's bayareatheology.org. If you are interested in learning more about the Bay Seed Collective or helping support the work that we are doing, go to bayseed.org. That's BAYSEED.org. At Bay Area Theology, we believe that healthy ministry begins with healthy theology. Our hope is to cultivate thoughtful conversations that strengthen the church here in the Bay Area and beyond. This has been Bay Area Theology, theology from the Bay for the Bay.